I often get asked how long a baby or child's bedtime routine should last and what the steps should be. Whether you have an infant or a preschooler, I like to see a bedtime routine take 30 minutes or less. Today, I'm going to walk you through my go to simple bedtime routine. But before I dive in, I want to ask a favor. If you have found this podcast helpful, could you please take a second right now to rate and review it? You can even do it while you're still listening to this episode. The ratings and reviews help us reach more parents. And of course, I want this podcast to be helpful to as many parents as possible. Thanks in advance for your support. Hi, I'm Allison Egidi, a pediatric sleep and wellness coach and a mom of two. I love to help parents find solutions. This is How Long Till Bedtime. Consistent bedtime routines are a key component to healthy sleep habits. But sometimes parents struggle deciding what the exact steps should be in said bedtime routine. And as your child enters those toddler and preschool years, you may find that the bedtime routine starts to take on a life of its own. So, why do I want your child's bedtime routine to be short and sweet? First, I'm a big fan of early bedtimes. If you're new here, be sure to go back and listen to episode 1, where I make my case for an early bedtime. And with that in mind, let's be honest. We are all busy and we are juggling a lot of things. If the bedtime routine is long or drags out, an early bedtime is virtually impossible. Second, long bedtime routines often result in babies going to bed overtired and toddlers and children kind of above the toddler age group catching a second wind. This results in resistance to going to bed and or taking a long time to fall asleep. So, keeping all of that in mind, here's my basic bedtime routine that I recommend you implement when your little one is an infant. And other than some minor changes along the way, it actually shouldn't change that much as you shift into toddlerhood, preschool years, early elementary. So I'll talk about the little shifts, but they aren't going to be significant. All right, first step, take a bath or wash hands. And before I move on to the second step, I actually want to talk about the bath as part of a bedtime routine. I absolutely do not think a bath needs to be a consistent step in the bedtime routine. If you want to bathe your child nightly as part of the routine because it's important to you or because your child really enjoys the bath or finds it relaxing, that is great. If you only bathe your child every other day as part of the bedtime routine because their skin is dry, or you don't feel a nightly bath is necessary, or you're in a hurry one evening because you're running late, a bath every other night or an occasional skipped bath here or there, totally fine. If your little one really doesn't like the bath, I had one of these, and it gets them revved up or agitated, and you want that bath to happen at another time during the day that's easier, not related to bedtime at all, great. I'm fine with that too. So, this first step doesn't technically need to be consistent. That's why rather than saying take a bath as step 1, I like to say take a bath or wash hands. Because if we're not doing a bath, I usually do hand washing and face washing to get them ready for bed. So step 1 is take a bath or wash hands. The second step is putting on pajamas. Obviously, as part of this step, you may also be putting lotion on your baby, maybe even doing a little short massage while you're putting on that lotion, putting on a fresh diaper, etc. And if your child is in a sleep sack, which is what I recommend after 4 months, I like to put that sleep sack on with the pajamas because I want the sleep sack to kind of be part of that whole pajama get up. As they grow up, this becomes more important because we don't want toddlers to think about that sleep sack as optional or start to resist it more as you go to put them into bed. And so I like them to just think of it as part of getting their pajamas on. If you want to hear more about my thoughts on sleep sacks, check out episode 76. Then, if you have advanced to the stage where your little one needs their teeth brushed, after the pajamas, I like to do the teeth brushing. And if you have a baby who is still nursing or getting a bottle before bed, that would be the next step. And I am actually totally fine with having a feeding as part of the bedtime routine. I know there are some out there who think it's important to shift away from that. I think it's great. And when we have infants, it can help them get longer stretches at night and or get to sleeping through the night sooner. So I do not have an issue with feedings in a bedtime routine. But once your baby is 4 months, and ideally sooner, you want your baby to not be falling asleep during this final feeding because we want to get to the point where you're putting your little one down in the crib awake. When independent sleep is the goal, this is a really important step to not be letting them doze during that final feeding. It's important that our little ones learn to go down in their crib awake. So when they wake up during the night, everything is exactly the way they remember it being when they fell asleep. We don't want that environment to change. We don't want them to wake up startled, like, whoa, how'd I get here? Or wake up kind of feeling, oh, I fell for it again. They got me into this crib because that sensation is not conducive to them putting themselves back to sleep. So, by putting them down awake and having them fall asleep on their own in the crib, you're setting them up to not be startled or agitated when they wake up during the night, which makes it easier for them to just put themselves back to sleep. If your baby is under 4 months and you're looking for more tips on teaching them to go down awake, check out episodes 65 and 67. All right, so after the feeding or after putting on jammies, if you have a child who's no longer eating as part of their bedtime routine, we want to move on to reading. This is where we have a little variance here. So, for an infant, this can literally be a very short board book. It doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be multiple books. And if your infant is exhausted from, say, a long day at daycare, or they just had an off day, or you're running late, if they are overtired, I don't want you to stress about skipping this book and moving on to the next step. But I do like to start inserting the book after the feeding by about 4 months, if at all possible, or if you're already beyond that, you can still insert it. Don't worry. I like to insert it because it allows us to separate the feeding from the falling asleep. And we're putting a placeholder there for when you ultimately drop the feeding. So let me elaborate on that. It's really initially not about the importance of reading to our kids and helping them learn to read and all of that. That's all really important. And I still read with my kids in the evening. But initially in early infancy, it's not really about that. It's about having the placeholder so that when your child can advance to the point where they're either holding their own bottle or it's not taking as much arm support from you if you're nursing, then you can start going from feeding and then reading to reading while feeding. So these two kind of get combined. This sets you up for a smoother transition when you ultimately drop that feeding from the bedtime routine. I always like to do things that are setting us up for smoother transitions down the road, and this is an important one. So let's fast forward to that moment where you decide it's time to drop that feeding during the bedtime routine. If your child is used to having that milk while reading, yes, we're removing the milk, but we're not actually removing a step because the book is still happening at the same time. So, teeth brushing, then sit and read. We've removed having milk with the reading, but the step is still intact. So, hopefully that makes sense. So, for the infants, this book can be short and sweet. We're inserting that placeholder. As we enter the toddler stage, so I would say to put a little more clarity around that, definitely once we hit the 2 years and beyond group, I recommend starting to read a consistent number of books each night, usually 2 or 3 books, but be consistent. So, as part of your routine, we read 2 books, or it's we read 3 books. But it's not some nights we read 2, some nights we read 3, because that is not consistent. And so we really want to decide, is it we read 2 books or we read 3 books? And I choose that based on how rushed do you feel as part of your bedtime routine? Do you feel like you can comfortably have time to read 2 or comfortably have time to read 3? So that's kind of how I choose that number. Then again, let's fast forward. There's going to be a point where your child has stronger reading comprehension skills, and they're going to want you to read longer books like chapter books. That's when I shift away from we read 3 books each night to we read 10 or 15 minutes each night. Again, you're either a family who reads 10 minutes each night or 15 minutes. Be consistent about the length of time. The reason this consistency, whether it be the number of books or how long you read, is important is because from about 2 years on, this is often where bedtimes start to go off the rails. Kids start to ask for an extra book or a little more time reading. And of course, we all love the idea of our kids loving books. So it seems like a great thing, and it may seem harmless to read that extra book that they asked for. But then sometimes this just opens the door to more and more requests or to just more stalling on other aspects of the routine. So, this is usually kind of the gateway to more stalling and more resistance, or to having to deal with more tantrums or fit throwing when you do try to say, no, no, we're done here. It's time to go to bed. But when you're inconsistent, then you're more likely to get big feelings and a more emotional reaction. So I've said it a bunch and I'll keep saying it, but young children thrive with structure and consistent routines. So be consistent. So when they ask for that extra book, you can say, oh no, we read 2 books as part of our bedtime routine. We've already read 2 books. Now it's time to go to bed. But the good news is that we can read more books tomorrow. So if you're consistent, you're less likely to get continued pushback or big emotional reactions when we hold that structure. All right, so now we've wrapped up the reading. After the reading, it's time. It's go time. It's time to put your baby in the crib or tuck your child into bed. If you listen to episode 85, you know that I like to finish the routine with a simple song. And I recommend singing the same song each night so that that song cues your child's body to know that it's time to sleep. If your child's in the crib, you'll sing that song as you walk over, give your baby a kiss, and put them in the crib. If your child is sleeping in a bed, you'll tuck them in and sing that song, maybe rub their back while you're singing that song, give them a kiss, and then it's time to say goodnight. I'll see you in the morning. I love you so much, and leave the room. That's it. Short and simple. But before I wrap up, I want to share 2 final tips related to the bedtime routine. The first is that other than the bath and brushing teeth, you want the rest of the routine to happen in the room where your child sleeps. So if they still sleep in your room, do the routine in your room. If they have their own room where they sleep, do the routine in their room. What I want to avoid here is, let me think of an example. It'd be reading in the family room and then transitioning to the bedroom to go to bed. Transition and moving rooms can be disruptive and stimulating. And we want to limit transitions and we want to limit stimulating activities. So, in that room and a relaxed atmosphere. So, as part of a relaxing atmosphere, I also recommend that you have that bedroom dimly lit during the bedtime routine. This is another cue to your child's body that it's time to get ready for sleep. You can do this by simply putting a low watt light bulb and a lamp in your child's room. So some people get fancy and they have dimmers, and others, we just put a low watt light bulb in a lamp and we're good to go. If you have a toddler or a preschooler or early elementary age child and you're already dealing with a lot of resistance, and as you're listening and envisioning implementing this simple routine, you're thinking, no, I'm going to get a lot of pushback here, and this doesn't sound quite doable for me. I encourage you to check out my $29 Get Your Evenings Back workshop that's designed for parents with kids between the age of 2.5 and 10 years old. It's available on sleepandwellnesscoach.com under Work With Me, and I'll walk you through how to totally reset your evenings and how to get your child on board with a new simplified bedtime routine. So you can find it on my website. I'll also link to it in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me today. I hope this episode helps you confidently move forward with a simple bedtime routine that you can use with your child for years and years. And be sure to come back next week to hear the second episode in our 3-part summer series with a pediatrician. Dr. Grice and I are talking about growth charts, and you don't want to miss it. Thank you for listening to How Long Till Bedtime. To learn how we can work together to improve your child's sleep, please visit sleepandwellnesscoach.com.